the morning here, and it's a beautiful day. I have been looking forward to spending this time with you, especially because I have the privilege of doing this with my friend Tessa. I wanted to start by bringing greetings from my husband. He has been a pastor for many years, and he has been praying for us and for this time together. I have been writing for over 35 years. And the books that I have written are mostly for teenagers and women. So when I am speaking on writing from the heart, it definitely is a result of having that um, audience for all these years that are motivated by the things that go deep into the heart. I have learned a lot about how to tell a story so that it will touch a heart. And it has to begin when it comes from the heart of the writer. And this is different than just having a good idea and trying to get words put together to give information. When you tell that story that comes from the heart, there's something that God does that allows it to go deeper into the heart of the reader. So I would like to share with you just some of the things that have helped that process as I've been writing for so many years. First, it's been to understand that as a writer, you are creating art. All art is subjective, so there will be many people that don't like your art, and that has to be okay, because you have to see what it is that you are gifted and called to do and take the responsibility to do that work in order to tell that story or write that book or put together that meaningful article that will touch a heart. So you put aside all of the opinions and criticism and advice from everyone else, because there's always plenty. And you just think about what is in my heart to share and how can I do the work needed to make that the best it can be. Um, when we realize that what we write will last much longer than us, it gives a sense of sacredness to that responsibility, so that we realize we are creating something that speaks truth and that it has the ability to have an effect on a person's life for eternity. That, that is amazing. It's it's such a privilege. So that's where I begin when I write anything. It's that narrowing it down to what is it that God is asking me to do. So before I write, I have this thought that my experiences are the gold mine that I go to. And when you are working in a mine, it's dark and you have to dig deep, but there's gold in there. And there's great value in what you have to offer, what you have already experienced in your life, the thoughts that you have on a certain subject, the way that you see life. There's great value in that because of the way that God is working through your life. So to see that as the first place that you are starting any writing, that it is a privilege and you have what you are going to write about already inside you. It just has to be brought out. I began writing for teenage girls, not because I wanted to be a writer, not because I thought I had anything special to say, but I started writing because those teen girls asked me to write books for them. I had been teaching classes and Bible studies and spending time counseling girls, but they wanted stories. They wanted the parables. They wanted the life lessons to see them acted out by characters. So the teenage girls helped me to write the first book, and that is the first book in the Christie Miller series. What happened with these stories is that I could tell through the characters all the lessons I had been trying to teach in classes and all the truth from the Bible that I wanted them to understand. They began to learn those truths from the characters. And then they wanted more. They wanted to see what happened next. They wanted to keep going. So here was this opportunity to become a writer, to be a storyteller that would give truth in a way that those girls would take it to heart. I began receiving letters from girls around the world that started reading these books, and I kept writing more and more and more and more. I have written over 40 books just about these characters because they keep getting older and the readers keep getting older and want to know more life lessons from these characters. It's extraordinary because it's just a story. We might look at it as fiction doesn't have a value for anything more than entertaining. But when you can smuggle that truth into a story that your audience responds to, then you have this chance to continue to give truth and hope and light in a way that that audience will receive it. The way that the readers viewed the characters was that the characters were role models for them. So they would start to make life decisions based on what the characters did. And the characters that did not make good decisions, they were writing to tell me they had been going down that same path and they made changes. They realized that that would not lead to what they wanted their life to be about. So I'm very enthusiastic about, as a writer, you tell these stories from this deep place in you because it can then touch a heart and change a life. I set the stories in places that were familiar to me. I grew up in Southern California, going to the beach. I had friends who were surfers. And so all of that familiar beach, teenagers, surfers, that was the place where I started as I was writing because it was so familiar. And this is important because when it feels familiar to you as the writer, it comes in a flow as you write so that you're telling the story and it is authentic so that the reader begins to believe what you say about the location, about the people, because if they believe, that that is true and it feels authentic, then the truth that you want to share will also feel true. It will feel to the reader that this is solid and this could change my life. So it means the whole story has that feeling of this could really happen. I want to know God the way these characters know God. I want to make choices the way these characters are making choices. So again, I received over the decades so many letters from readers who made life-changing decisions because of the stories, because they read about characters that felt real to them. That's amazing. That's amazing. So I want to give you 3 steps of how you get to that place where you are writing from the heart and knowing that what you have to say is of value. You're digging in your gold mine and you're pulling up the truths that need to be communicated. This is whether you are writing a story or an article. These 3 steps will help you to create a process that can add to a process you already have as a writer, or it can give you a rhythm to be able to go back to as you continue to write over the years. The first step is to brood. And this comes from Genesis 1, verse 2, where the Spirit of God was brooding over the waters. So at creation, there was nothing. It was dark and void and chaos. But God's Spirit came and brooded. That concept is the same as a mother bird brooding over her nest, over her eggs. She's waiting. She's caring for them in that way that she's covering them. This has been important for me so many times because as a creative person, I have ideas all the time. I could write about this. This would be interesting. Oh, here's an idea. But when I stop and I brood over those ideas, I listen, I wait. It's being formed. It's not yet ready. And to take that time, not too much time, but just enough time to settle yourself and to brood over what you're writing. When I am in this stage of brooding, I begin to collect all the pieces. And this is that process of having everything ready, everything you need. I start to put ideas down on paper, just thoughts about what it might be. I collect pictures and put them together so that I have a binder, a notebook. And before I start writing, all these pieces have already been collected because I've been brooding over this idea. Maybe I would print out an article that I found that was about the theme that I want to write about. So I have everything together. And then it's this time for the second step. And that next step is to ask. I ask God for wisdom. Every time I start a new book, I write out a prayer and I put it in the notebook, in that binder. I write out a prayer of dedication to the Lord, and I offer up myself to write a story. And I ask him, may I have a story? Is there something you would like me to say? And always God gives me such a deep sense of the responsibility that it is to be a writer. I don't want to lead a little one astray, but also that delight of being able to do the work as he's leading me because I'm asking. I found in Exodus 31 this information about an artist, and that's what we are, artists. And his name was Bezalel, and he was appointed as the chief craftsman and artist of the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant. And he was given this responsibility to create something beautiful that would draw people to God's holiness, that they would see in the art the wonder, the beauty, the power of God. And that's what we are being invited to do as writers, that we are creating art that reflects the glory and the beauty and the majesty of God. So what made Bezalel qualified to do this, it tells us in, again, Exodus 31, it said that God filled him with a spirit of wisdom. So that's why I always ask for wisdom. I ask for a story, but I always ask for wisdom. And as we're told in James 1:5, if any of us lack wisdom, let them ask of God. We lack wisdom, so we ask of God, what do you want me to write? How do you want me to express this information? And so when we see ourselves as artists and we understand that we are doing this to reflect God, to bring honor to his name, that is when we have that heart level of our writing being an offering to him. He gave us a gift and we're giving the gift back to him. He blessed us so that we could be a blessing to others. The reason this is so important is because it removes any sense of self-importance, that I'm going to be famous or I have something so important to say, people will want to buy my books. No, it's a completely different heart level, a sense of what God is inviting us to do and how we are simply being obedient to that. So when I ask, the other part of it is I always ask the question, what do the readers need to hear? So if I'm focusing on the readers, then again, my heart is right. I'm doing this to give to others. What has happened with many beginning writers that I have known over the years is that they begin to see this importance of what they're doing has created a big audience, or people are looking at them and giving their opinion. And what I have seen happen is that many get self-focused. They're looking at me. They want my advice. They have put me up on a pedestal. But to write from the heart means that it's just between you and God. I'm writing what He's asking me to write. He has blessed me so that I can be a blessing to others. And that's it. There's nothing connected to that writing that is supposed to make me feel good about myself or make me more noticed or my mother proud of me or something that's focused on me rather than the audience. So I always ask, what do my readers need? When I was writing for teens at the very beginning, I had a board on the wall in my office, and all these girls that wrote to me would send their pictures, just these little wallet-sized pictures. And the whole board had the pictures, so many faces. And I would look at them and ask them, what do you need to read? What story do you need to hear to draw you closer to God? So I always felt like I had this audience. They were waiting. When's the next book? Come on, write some more. But I had them in mind. I was writing for them. So that's it. First of all, to brood, to collect all the pieces, to think about it. And then secondly, to ask for wisdom, to ask, what do the readers need to hear? And to ask God to give you the story, give you the words. And then the third thing is simply do the work. Every writer, every person that I've ever known who has started with great expectations, great confidence, has hit bumps in the road, has hit criticism, has been discouraged. So many have stopped. But you have to do the work. You have to finish the race. Keep going. It is hard. It is very hard sometimes, because what you're doing has the potential of having eternal value. So of course there will be opposition. Of course there will be criticism. And again, it's just putting all that aside and just focusing heart to heart between you and the Lord and thinking about your audience. What is it that they need to hear? And keep going. Just keep working at it. When you think about the work of getting gold out of a mine, you can see that process being dirty and difficult and dark and so much work. But there's gold in there. You have gold in there that can be pulled out, and that can be given because it is of great value. You need to believe that. Not because you're trained or special or a better writer than anyone else. It's just because you have been invited to do this work, and you must do the work. Maybe only 2 people will ever read what you write. It's still of the same value if 2 million people read it, because you are doing it for the right reasons from the heart. What I'm going to do now is pause for 2 minutes, and we will have this small break, and then Tessa will have something wonderful to tell us. But during this break, if you would like to take that moment to think about who your audience is, write that down or focus in so that you can see those faces. You know who it is that wants to listen to what you have to say, and you can focus on how you will create the work that will have that, possibly that eternal effect on their lives. So let's take this break for 2 minutes, and then Tessa will introduce herself. And then after Tessa, if we have time, we would love to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Marhaba. Ahlan wa sahlan. That's all the Arabic I know. My name is Tessa Afshar. I'm speaking to you from the northeast corner of the United States. And my husband and I send greetings and blessings to you all. It's a pleasure to be with you and an honor to be teaching alongside dear Robin. I thought today I would start with a story. I thought it would be fitting to start with a story since we are speaking about fiction. So I want to start telling you a story from our part of the world that you may be familiar with, but I'm going to add a twist to it. Long ago, there lived a young king who had married the woman he loved, and he had poured all his heart and all his love into this marriage, all his trust into this queen. Unfortunately, the queen was not worthy of all his trust. And what happened was that she betrayed him. Not only did she betray him, but she planned to dethrone him and replace the king with her lover. But the plot was discovered, and so the queen was removed and punished. But this whole experience hurt the king so badly that it damaged him in a very serious way. It damaged his heart and his mind. And after that, the king was no longer able to love. He was no longer able to trust, to give grace or forgiveness. A part of his soul broke to such a degree that he was no longer living a life of right order. He was no longer living in his right mind. In his madness, as the year passed, everybody pressed him to marry again because they wanted him to have children for the dynasty. And so he married. But the very next morning after the wedding, he would think, well, what if this one proves to be just like the other one? And what if this one betrays me too? Well, I am going to kill her before she kills me. So that's what he would do. The very day after the wedding, he would kill the queen. And this went on for a season in his madness. Now, there was a young woman in the court of the king. Her name was Shahrazad. And this young woman had managed to see the king underneath the madness, the real king, the real man. And she had learned to love him. Well, in that process, Shahrazad came up with a plan to bring healing to the king's life. And so she insisted on marrying him, and her father, who lived in the court, arranged for that marriage with a heavy heart. But Shahrazad came with an amazing gift. Shahrazad was a storyteller, you see. She was an amazing storyteller. So on her wedding night, Shahrazad began to tell the king a brilliant story. It was full of adventure and excitement. But right before the story ended, Shahrazad said, "Oh, well, I am tired. I'm going to sleep now." And the king said, "What do you mean you're tired? I need to hear the end of the story." And she said, "I'll tell you tomorrow. I really need to sleep." So in the morning, the king thought, "I want to know the end of that story. Well, I'll let her live one more night." So Shahrazad didn't die that day. That night, she told the end of that story, but she started a new story. And this one was all about love and how two hearts came together in spite of all the impediments they found. And so again, right before the end of the story, Shahrazad said, I'm too tired. I can't tell you the end of the story. I'll tell you tomorrow." So it went like this day after day until it became weeks, and the weeks became months, story after story after story. Until one morning, the king woke up and he realized he didn't want to kill Shahrazad. He loved her. You see, one story at a time, Shahrazad had healed the king. She had healed him of his madness. She had brought redemption. And the king knew that he couldn't utterly trust Shahrazad. She might still betray him, but love was more important than that possibility. So he took a chance because of Shahrazad's story. So here's what I want to tell you. You, my friends, are God's Shahrazads. You are God's storytellers. This world is the king. This world is the king who has lost his mind, lost its ability to love, lost its ability for grace, lost its ability to forgive, lost its ability to live a life of right order. But you are the Shahzads of God, and he has given you the ability to tell stories one thread at a time that will bring grace back to the world, that will teach forgiveness to the world, that will teach patience, trust, and the kind of love that will be risking their own well-being. So your stories are incredibly important. That is what shapes my own heart. I believe completely that I am one of God's Shahzads on this earth, that he has called me to tell stories. That's what drives me to write, this absolute conviction that when God gives you a story, it has a power. It has power to redeem, it has power to restore, and power to renew. Not because I do, I have no power. Not because I have such great talent, but because God is able to fulfill his purpose through you and through me and through simple stories. There's a verse in Psalm 57, the Psalm of David, Psalm 57, verse 2. And David writes, I cry out to God Most High, to God who fulfills his purpose for me. Now, this is really important. I cry out to God Most High, to God who fulfills his purpose for me. Because David wrote these words, it says in the Psalm, when he fled from Saul and hid in the cave. So he wasn't talking about God fulfilling his purpose for him after he became king and everything was easy. No, he had already been anointed by the prophet Samuel to be a king, but none of that had come to pass. Instead of being a king, he was an outlaw. And he was running away for his life. And in fact, he was now hiding literally in a dead-end cave with nowhere to go. But instead of giving up hope, instead of giving up his dream, that's when he held on to the promise of God. God will fulfill his purpose for me. So as a writer, that's your starting point. Has God called you to write? Has God given you stories? Well, let me tell you, that's his purpose in your life. And so you need to believe in that purpose. I remember when I was a kid, I grew up in the Middle East, and my dad was a doctor. He was a radiologist. And so he was very practical. So for him, it was important that we do really well at math and sciences because he thought that was the only way to make a living and be practical. But I was really good at storytelling even back then. And I remember one time we had this national exam, and one of the subjects was writing essays, composition. So I'd written this story and I had brought my copy home with me. And I gave it to my father to read. And I remember my father read it. He was so moved that he got very teary-eyed. My father never cried, but his eyes filled with tears. And he looked at me and he said, "You wrote that?" And I said, "Yes." And I saw his heart in his eyes in response to that story. So he was quiet for a moment. He looked at me and then he said, "But how did you do at math?" So you see, sometimes in the world, the practical, the expectation sort of tries to squish that purpose that God has in our lives. The Lord has given us a calling and a talent, but sometimes practicality and the expectations of the world try to come against that. Now, of course, it took me years to grow out of that and recognize that I would never be truly happy until I fulfilled that purpose and started writing. And when my first book came out 10 years ago, my father was so proud. I started late. I hope you won't wait that late. I hope you will start writing now. Now, as you begin to walk in that purpose, in your gifting, you will have blocks to that gifting because you may not believe in your gifting. You may doubt it. You may think that I don't have what it takes, or I'm not so sure that I am that good at what God wants me to do. You may not believe in yourself, but there is an enemy to your soul, an enemy to your gifting. Just as Robin was saying, you will have opposition. That enemy wants to oppose your gifting. And he really believes in your gifting. He knows the power of your stories, the stories you have yet to write, because he knows those stories can bring healing into this mad world. And so he wants to stop you. Well, I want to tell you about 3 blocks very quickly. These are blocks that I struggle with in my own life. There are many more, and you have to figure out what your blocks are and how you overcome them. So for me, my biggest block is probably fear. Right from the beginning, and all those years that I didn't write, even though I knew I should be, was because I was so afraid that I might fail. But even today, after having published 10 books, I think I've published 9 books now. I just sent in my 10th one, but it's not out yet. After all of those books, still, when I start writing a book and in the middle of it, I have this question of myself, this fear. What if this one is really bad? What if this one is a failure? What if it disappoints my fans? What if they don't love this one as much? What if the publisher doesn't like it? What if it doesn't sell? There's so many fears that are attached to writing. And fear of failure is one of the bigger ones. So there are 2 things I want to tell you about fear. The opposite of fear, the Bible tells us, is the spirit of sonship, is that ability and that realization to know you are the son, you are the daughter, you are the child of God through Jesus Christ. And so recognizing your position in God by faith. So you have to fight fear with your faith, and you have to build up your faith. The other thing I want to tell you is when you are afraid, this is really great. Because even though the enemy wants to wipe you out with fear, wants to stop you with fear, stop you writing, but in that fear, as you learn to overcome it, there are these incredible, powerful threads and lessons that you can write in your books. So, for example, I just happen to have this book here. It's called Bread of Angels. This is the story of Lydia. In this story, Lydia battles fear, fear of failure, just like me, as it so happens, because that's the lesson I know. But she also battles fear in terms of provision. She has her own business, but what if the business fails? What if there isn't enough money? And she has to learn that she can trust God for his provision. These are the lessons that I learned in my own fears. Well, I get letters just like my very dear friend Robin. I get letters from my readers that these lessons speak to their hearts, encourage them to again renew their trust in God. So you see, if you have a block that the enemy wants to use against you, God is using that block for his own gain. The second block that I have to battle in my writing, in my heart, is what I will call diminishment. That is being smaller than what God designs you to be. Now, there is absolutely nothing wrong with being small at all. In fact, In our story, Shahrazad only tells story to one person, and that one person is the audience that she's intended to have, and that's a perfect audience. And by that one person, she manages to change a whole world. So whatever audience God calls you to, whether it's one or whether it's 1,000, it doesn't matter. It's what God calls you to. There's nothing too small. However, there are times when God calls you to more, but you are not able to walk in the more that God has for you. So let me talk about another person who lived a small call. Ruth the Moabite. So Ruth in the Bible is from Moab. Moab was in present-day Jordan. Ruth the Moabite, when we read her story in the Bible, she only has really one intention, one desire. Her destiny for her is very small. It's just so that she and her beloved mother-in-law, Naomi, survive, so they don't starve. That's all she wants. Well, then she finds that she can marry and she can have a child. And so Naomi's lineage continues. So the name of Naomi is not wiped out. She can give Naomi a grandson. And that's all that she wants. So it's a small desire. All that time, and that's all she knows, is that she is able to fulfill that small desire. But God knows more. Long after Ruth is gone, and Ruth probably knows this in heaven now, but from her lineage comes a young man. His name is Jesus, and he's the Savior of the world. And that young man comes from the bloodlines of Ruth and Boaz. Now, Ruth had no idea how great her destiny was. Her destiny seemed very small in her own eyes. Just like you and I, we may look at our own lives and think, well, this is going to be very small, but you don't know how God is going to use you. However, there are times when the enemy is going to battle you, not because God wants you to stay small, but because the enemy wants to make smaller what the Lord has called, diminish what the Lord has called you to do. And you have to know that difference. So, how do you battle diminishment? So practically, you need to learn your craft better and better. Don't stay small and undeveloped in your writing. Do what you're doing now. Become more learned. I still go to conventions and I still learn my craft as much as I can. You never stop learning. So sharpen your gift and don't allow it to stay small. Spiritually, pray daily for open doors. Ask God to remove blocks against your call. Ask God for favor. Ask God for meaningful connections that will release you more so that the enemy doesn't diminish you. Finally, and very quickly, the last thing I want to talk about is pride. A few years ago, I got it in my head because I looked at all the people that I looked up to in the industry of writing, and I noticed that they had all published or sold 1 million books or more, or many more, as in the case of Robin. And I hadn't sold 1 million books, anywhere near 1 million books. And I thought, that's my measure of success. I have to sell 1 million books so that I am successful. And I became really obsessed with this million because it became, the thought was, if I've sold 1 million, I'm successful and I am now secure, and I am now, I've proved that I am accepted, and I've established myself as a writer. And God very quietly whispered in my heart one day, will you let me be your million? In other words, will you let me be all the things that million represents to you? Let me be your success. Let me be your security. Let me be your acceptance. It was my pride that wanted 1 million, but my soul only wanted Jesus. So make that choice, whatever your million is, whether it's acceptance, whether it's publication, whether it's a certain number, whether it's a particular person affirming you, put it all aside. Make Jesus be that to you. And that's all I have to say today. So I don't know if you have time for questions.
Well, thank you so much, dear sisters Tessa and Ruben. بدي أطلب من المشاركين رجاءً في حال وجود أي أسئلة أن يرسلوها في اختيار Q&A خلال البريك القادم. راح ناخذ بريك لمدة 7 دقائق. المحاضرة الأخيرة بشجعكم تكونوا موجودين فيها، راح تكون محاضرة ممتعة ومهمة جدا، وهي تتحدث عن مشاركة كتاباتنا على منصات التواصل الاجتماعي. زميلنا في أوفير وهو راح يعطينا بعض التعليمات والملاحظات الهامة في مشاركة كتاباتنا على منصات التواصل الاجتماعي بطريقة تجذب متابعينا ورواد منصات التواصل الاجتماعي وأيضا المهتمين بكتاباتنا. فلمن يرغبون في طرح الأسئلة على تسا وروبن، رجاء إرسالها في Q&A، وفي حال لم يوجد هناك أي أسئلة خلال البريك راح ننتقل للمحاضرة الأخيرة. يمكن تعدينا الوقت قليلا، راح نحاول أن ننهي على الوقت تماما، لكن بنشجعكم أنكم تحضروا المحاضرة الأخيرة، وهي مهمة جدا في عصر التكنولوجيا وعصر التواصل الاجتماعي ويومنا هذا.